okay to do interval training later in the week after a carb night? So later in the week, meaning like 4, 5, 6 days in, before the carb night.
As long as it's hit, and depending on the prescription that you're following, I wouldn't go beyond 4 minutes easy, 30 minutes all out. You can try, but you won't be very successful. You're pushing very hard into what's that called? Why am I suddenly blanking?
I'm not sure what you're thinking about.
The sugar burning mode, the technical name for it. I'm totally spaced.
Glycolysis? What are we?
Yeah. Dang it. Wow. All right. I'm totally toasted. But essentially you get to the point where your body cannot produce energy fast enough. It needs to go into anaerobic pathways, which require sugar, and you don't have enough of it, so you're going to burn out really fast.
Okay. So do you see any benefit to kind of pushing through that?
The 4 minutes, 30 seconds, you're going to kind of hit that anaerobic threshold, and then by the time you're going to cross over into that state of carbohydrate burning, you're stopping.
Okay.
So the benefit would be just higher fat mobilization.
Got it. How do you know when you've really gone overboard with carbs? Can you define feeling waterish for those who are not so in tune with their bodies?
The next morning, if you... that's a very hard question to answer, actually, because what feels like overboard, you could correct in the week. So it's difficult to say what overboard really is. I mean...
Well, I guess so.
If you can't recover your original weight by the next carb night, you went overboard.
Oh, I think we're talking about carb backloading at this point.
Oh, carb backloading?
Could be. I'm not sure because this person didn't specify.
Oh, carb backloading, it's just the sloshy, soft feeling. And you should be able to wake up with carb backloading every morning and see your abdominals. If those start to disappear, you're overdoing it.
Well, if you're not at that point, though, like if you're still like losing fat,
then I don't know exactly what to feel for, to be honest.
Okay.
I mean, the best you could do is maybe how you feel mentally. If you've gone overboard, you're trying to process a lot of sugar that couldn't make it into the muscles, you're going to feel like you didn't sleep. You're going to feel like total crap the next morning. And that's because you basically put the burden of clearing all that glucose onto your nervous system. So it's overactive in those early parts of the evening, and you also don't get the kickstart and fat burning. So you're going to feel pretty crappy in the morning.
Are we talking about just a little bit overboard or a lot overboard when you feel like
that's pretty overboard.
Okay. Yeah, that jives with my experiences as well.
Yeah, it almost feels like a hangover.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question that I might have posted on the internet for you?
Sure.
What's your opinion on, to what extent is our muscles glycolytic, and to what extent can they be trained to run on fats?
So the research is actually pretty good there. There's training. You can push the anaerobic threshold pretty high in muscle tissue. I'm more and more convinced that there's a way to escape the whole idea that you have to have a certain level of sugar to push beyond the anaerobic threshold. Because I've seen people do it on carb night. That was one of the questions. It ties into one of them, and that's that I've used carb night for marathon runners before and sprinters, and they hit that level where they should be in pure carb burning. It should be unavoidable, and yet they keep going. Mm-hmm. So the question there is, what else is entering into that pathway? And if I've learned anything, it's that we don't really know shit about the body. So that there's probably something missing there. But we do know that you can push the anaerobic threshold pretty high if you know how to do it.
Cool.
So here's a great question for both of you. Assuming one wants to get a bigger knowledge about the human body, what would you guys read? Any books in particular? Titles of those books? Particularly for some people who are just starting to understand how everything works.
Carb night.
Assuming they've already read that since they're posting in our forums.
Don't read any books till mine comes out. No more reading. No. Learning what about the body, right?
Right. That's a good question, and I get asked that very often, and my response is, I don't know. I wish I had a good suggestion, because it would save me the trouble of having to hear the same question over and over again.
Yeah.
And I just really don't know.
I mean,
Josh, are you writing a book?
I'm writing like 5, and I got to pick the one that I'm gonna finish. So I would like to write one that sort of does synthesize what's been learned in the paleo community so far, and the anti-aging longevity communities, because there seems to be a real big need for that. Back to this person's question, though. I mean, maybe the question's not all that well formed, because they're not saying, what part of the body they want to learn about, but man, learn about the parts that's most relevant, right? So if you're a type 2 diabetic, learn about what the heck's going on there. You don't want to learn about the, bone structure or something, and so, or you just start with your health problems. I'm sure there's some aspect of your physical being that is not ideal to you, and any one of those, when addressed, opens up Pandora's box of the body. So.
Right. Yeah,
That's a good approach.
Yeah, that's what got me started going to the research journals, is just every book you come across, there's some limiting point to it. Mm-hmm. If it doesn't answer your questions, you got to go somewhere.
Yep.
And I just go to the research now. I don't even bother with the books.
All right, so one more set of questions. So we've got, all right, so Kiefer, you recommends doing MCT oil or coconut oil in the early part of the day. How would you know if you took in too much?
I don't think you can take in too much. If it's pure MCT or coconut oil, I would first use what's coming out of the other end as your marker. Mm-hmm. I mean, that stuff, it's oil, so it's going to go through you pretty fast. If you took too much, that's kind of the first indication. But
what we're talking about, so when you take in, like, let's say a quarter cup or something like that of coconut oil all at one time.
Of coconut oil?
Yeah.
Quarter cup?
You're hardcore.
Well, I'm not saying anyone could do it, but I'm saying...
Well, you could.
If you... Yeah, well, actually, I think that many people, especially in our audience, would if you told them to.
And that is a problem.
But the question is, like, so beyond a certain threshold, there's an overproduction of ketones, right?
Well, yes and no.
Yes and no. What does that mean?
Well, so you get high triglyceride levels in your system, and that triggers ketogenesis. But an overproduction of ketones, if you can't use them, you'll piss them out. I mean, there's really to say you ate too much coconut oil, that almost doesn't make sense to me. You know what I'm saying?
That's interesting.
I mean, it's what is sensible is you ate too many carbohydrates, because that could cause massive bloating, and you're going to feel horrible, and you're going to have some neural effects from that.
From an excess of ketones, though, don't you get an insulin response to help clean them up?
Yeah, so...
Well, isn't that what people want to avoid in the morning?
I'm going to say that depends.
That depends.
Because
God.
Wait,
these questions are hard to answer.
That does trigger the insulin response to clean up the ketones? What's the cleaning up, though? I thought if the excess ends up in the urine as well, those aren't being cleaned up.
Correct. So ketones can also be driven into cells by insulin. So if ketone levels get too high, it triggers an insulin response to help clear them out faster, particularly in skeletal muscle. So that's what we're trying to avoid. But
gosh, excess carb and sugar exposure and glucose exposure and all that has to be a threat affecting 99% of the population, and like excess ketone exposure has to be pretty rare, wouldn't you think?
Right, unless you're... So in the morning with carb backloading, I recommend not eating anything but essentially coconut oil and coffee. So you run into this ketone buildup, and that's why I specify about a tablespoon, maybe 2 tablespoons. That should be enough for the average male.
And for these people who need to lose weight still, or who want to stay where they are?
So these are people who are trying to lose body fat and building muscle at the same time.
So that's good clarification there. Because weight doesn't really matter; it's the fat. So. One alternative, if there really is a concern, could be the butter in the coffee, which is a pure saturated fat now. It's going to be treated a little differently than the MCT.
Right, but it takes longer to get into the system and doesn't necessarily prolong ketogenesis first thing in the morning. That's why I recommend the MCT, because most of the saturated fats take 3 to 5 hours before your body has access to use them as energy.
Okay.
Whereas MCT is immediate. And those immediate spikes of triglyceride levels in the system drive ketogenesis.
You're talking about after a carb night?
No.
Oh, just in general.
Yeah.
But if you're ultra low carb, is some saturated fat in the morning going to affect ketone production?
Positively or negatively?
Is it going to inhibit?
No, it shouldn't make any difference.
Right. Okay.
But it also won't help to accelerate it all or prolong.
Right. Okay.
So that's the goal of eating the MCT in the morning when they're trying to lose body fat, is to keep the ketogenic process going and push it into a wasteful point, because producing ketones is metabolically wasteful. So it's just inefficient. So I cannot give an exact answer as to how much will cause an insulin response. That's why I stay on the safe side and recommend a tablespoon or two.
Okay, because you do realize that any numbers that you give out are the ones that your audience will stick to.
I know. So stick to 2 tablespoons.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, that's what I've been telling people.
How would you even know you had a ketone overproduction? Would it be through this glucose, through the insulin? An unexpected insulin response? Is that our only way to track this?
Yeah. What's funny is some people don't even go into ketosis even when they overproduce. They won't urinate out the ketones effectively. So, and ketosis is that state of overproducing ketones.
Right,
people usually mistake ketogenesis with ketosis. You can be in ketogenesis without having ketosis at all. So the thing to look for is if a severe insulin response from ketone buildup could leave you hypoglycemic and not able to track logical thought very well. That would be your indicator. You may not feel bad, you may not be woozy, but you're having a hard time processing things. But that affects most people anyway.
So last part, like this connects to the coconut oil question. So by taking coconut oil, MCT oil, on the 12th hour and 2 to 3 hours after that, would it be okay? Excuse me. Would it be okay to take the oil every 3 hours, not taking in any protein or carbs, to incorporate a carb backloading style fast day and a sort of 24-hour fast? Or would the effects mess up fat loss gains or help it? Guess who this question is from?
So, Mark Teeler?
No.
Oh.
No, this is from Big Tex.
Oh.
The guy is always trying to integrate fasting.
Yeah, so basically we're trying to replace a day of fasting with a day of coconut oil? Is that the
pretty much
gist here?
Yeah. So, yeah, using your recommendations from the intermittent fasting articles.
Any answer I would give would be conjecture.
Yeah.
Right. There's just no studies on a pure fat day perform that way and what's going to happen. I would imagine you'll be definitely in an autophagic range. You could potentially, by the end of the day, have shut down mTOR activation, which any catabolic processes that are running rampant, which there will be some because you're not eating anything but coconut oil, there's nothing to limit or stop those. So I would not recommend it.
Okay.